All right, it's October 14th, Finance Committee meeting. We have one item on the agenda tonight, and that is to talk about next year's budget. According to the financial recovery plan, we as council are supposed to give our recommendations to the Safety Service Director for items that we would like to see changed on the budget or added to the budget or taken away from the budget. So we're supposed to have that done by the end of the month. And when we met at our regular meeting at the end of last month, we thought this tonight would be a good idea just to have a conversation about that. I'll open it up to any questions or comments right now. We'll just have some open dialogue right now.
Yeah, I have some kind of specific things that I've talked to the Safety Service Director and some other folks in the administration about. But I think the other thing that immediately came to mind was the Norwood Community Television and
Big on my radar.
the best way to go about funding that. Continuing to use whatever funds they can get, but how we can integrate that into the budget as a whole, where that money might come from. So it'd be good for me. Obviously, the specifics of what key or what budget it would come out of would be up to the administration, but it seems like for me, it would make sense to take something from our council budget. I was trying and failing to find last year's FRP, even though I know I have at least 10 copies in here somewhere in my email.
I have paper copies that I forgot.
Oh, perfect. So I was going to ask Mr. Gears or Miss Angela about Miss Angela. Angela, I just forgot her new married name. Sorry, Angela.
Is that her old name?
Her Hayes is her
Raines.
previous. Yes, Raines. About like what the budget has used, what we have used of the budget so far this year. See if there's leeway of like if we budget it the same, some of that money could be earmarked for Norwood Community Television specifically because we ended up not needing it for printing or whatever else we've budgeted it for. So that's just an idea I had.
Yeah, Norwood Community Television is high on my radar for tonight's conversation. Should we continue with that, or should we just talk about other ideas and then focus on key ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would say is just that, without having something in front of us to that represents, what the department heads and all that sort of thing have put forth, it's a little bit tough. Certainly we can work off of last year's, but otherwise, I think if we are able just to kind of talk about some specific items that are of importance, as far as we're concerned, gather those in a document to share with Mr. Powers and Mr. Miracle and everyone else. I think that would be good. And ultimately, as it pertains to why we're having this conversation, I just want to go back and cite the financial recovery plan and format for appropriations. It's item C. So as on or before November 1st of each year, the Finance Committee, City Auditor, and Mayor shall submit to City Council fund appropriations at the personal services and other object level by departments for all funds. So personal services, contractual services, materials and supplies, things of that nature are, let's see if there's anything else. Those are the general kind of buckets that end up, and then there's certainly capital projects for some departments as well. So I think for us just to have a general conversation, maybe on layout of the budget or key items to call out, I think that's probably as good as we can do for today.
Yeah, I think having a list of specific projects or areas of interest that we want to be sure are funded correctly. We don't have to get into specifics of how much it'll cost, since I don't have a good idea necessarily, besides for Norwood Community Television, obviously, but say like, okay, here's what was budgeted for 2026 last year for this particular capital improvement for the recreation department. Here's our ideas for it in that kind of part of the budget. Is that something that we can work out? Is kind of what I think would be good.
It's my understanding of the budget, not my understanding, it's my perception of the budget. So I'm not speaking for anybody else, but just from what I've read through, there's not a lot of room to add anything else. If we add more to the budget, I think the obvious cut is going to be on streets because that's where I think we are spending any kind of extra money we have is on streets. The rest of the budget is very tight. I mean, I know you've had conversations about the senior center and how underfunded they are, and they do a ton of work, and it would be very appropriate to increase their budget. But then the next question is, well, where does that money come from? And for anybody who's paying attention, we have plenty of money right now in the coffers, and we are spending more money than I think is. We're not spending a conservative amount of money. We're spending pretty liberally because we have this excess amount of money right now. But over the course of 5 years, that money is being spent down to where we need to be very aware and considerate of a long-term budget. And I think the financial recovery plan shows that we are spending a lot of money on streets now, on some other capital projects, and that as we move to the next 5 years, we're spending less on capital projects and less on streets because we're spending that money now.
Yep.
And I think that's also a matter of good government, that if we're not spending that money, then we should reduce taxes.
Right.
And so I think there's a really good case for where this money needs to be going.
Yep.
You were going to say something?
Oh yeah, I was just saying, we are getting caught up on a lot of stuff that has had to be kind of kicked down the road because of lack of money. We're in a great position where now we have this money. We can finally get all of these projects that have been waiting for 2, 3, 5 years done. And then we have to kind of draw back down to a normal spending level. So it's kind of a weird, with our spending.
I mean, the tax department has been reporting not impressive, helpful, optimistic numbers. Mr. Wagers last month at our meeting, I was just looking over the notes, reported that we're up 5% over last year's projections, not projections. We are currently up over 5% from last year's numbers at this time. So we're bringing in more money than we did last year. But that's not necessarily to say that we're going to continue to bring in that money every year, which again is why I think the budget is very reasonably conservative as we move further out.
Yep. So I think where I'm looking at budgetary stuff for things that I think would be good to do for next year is I'm trying to look at our capital planning workshop or worksheet, seeing what has been budgeted for next year, and kind of seeing if there's any other projects within that kind of subheading that we are more passionate about or that we think might need doing more so than the one that is currently in there. So for 2026, for the recreation center, they have a large chunk of money for an elevator. Not we should not try to change that, but there's other stuff that's smaller, like the gym floor refinish, second floor office update, engineering for platform lift to a pool area. Not saying that I want to change anything about that, but maybe some of those projects, if there's something that we as council thinks maybe needs to be moved up, like something that's scheduled for 2027, that might be better for next year. I don't know, that might be a starting point.
Yeah.
For me, as the Parks Infrastructure Committee Chair, I've talked to Mr. Powers about kind of my ideas for the parks budget. So right now, there's a lot of small things in every park that need done that are kind of budgeted for doing next year. And all those things are important. And it's always important to have extra money in the budget in case random stuff comes up. Someone kicks out the door, for instance. But I think that there is some value in trying to focus just on 2 parks or just a couple parks and really show that we are reinvesting in the parks, using, instead of doing 25,000 at one park, 50,000 at another, trying to do maybe more like 100,000 at one park and 100,000 at another, really renovate stuff, get brand new equipment, repave things, So that's kind of where my mind is at with park stuff. So when I talked to Noah, he said he'd talk to the mayor about that. So like, for instance, like at Doral, right now there's beach bathroom updates, fencing replacement, repaying the building interior and exterior, bathroom updates at other parks, bathroom updates at some of the other places, like some other smaller things, and maybe some of those smaller repairs and replacements all the money could be lumped together for one big complete renovation of one park. I don't know.
Right.
I will always defer to people who are actually on the ground who are like, we need to do this. This, roof is going to fall in. But
Right.
that's kind of what I was proposing with parks. And I think, Mr. Moore, you had talked about something with that too, like really focusing heavily on just 2 parks a year, having a plan like, okay, this year, these 2 parks are going to be the 2. Next year is going to be these 2 parks. The year after that's going to be these 2 parks, and kind of rotate through to keep everything fresh and renovated, so that they're a place that people look forward to going. And it's like, oh, it's new. Oh, they finally did something with this park where they took out all the playground equipment a couple years ago. Now there's nothing. Yeah.
Right.
So that is my contribution to that particular part. But
Well, I think there's some common sense wisdom in the idea of making a big dent with the funds that we do have to show people that we are actively improving the parks.
Yep.
And yes, I think you're right. There's again, common sense space to do maintenance things that are, if you've got a hole in a roof or leaking plumbing or something like that, that obviously needs to be spent. But again, I think it shows people that we're doing something with the money. That again, if we're not doing something with that money, then we should be cutting taxes.
yeah, and people notice. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that needs done is small and it's nice, but it doesn't really change the park. Showing that we are paying attention to the parks, that we are going to be going through and doing some big stuff there, and not just piecemeal here and there, I think would make people feel better about having to wait. But let's say we choose 2 parks this year, it all goes through. Administration's like, yep, that sounds great, Emily, you do whatever you want. People can see that and be like, hey, this is what we're doing at these parks, but your park is next.
Yeah.
And there still is probably going to be some frustration, but knowing that we are actively doing stuff, you can see it happening over here, and we do have a plan for your park next, I think would assuage some people who are frustrated with the lack of change or the lack of maintenance in some of the smaller parks, especially.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just like with paving roads. If they see no roads being paved, that's troublesome.
Yeah.
They see some roads being paved, they're like, okay, something is happening. Again, they still want their road paved.
Right.
But at least they know that there's some movement happening. It's not just us going around in a circle, not being able to get enough money to do any repaving at all.
I think we need to make sure the public is aware that there are things that come up that completely change capital projects. One of the things, if you look in the budget, there's $150,000 dedicated this last year that was supposed to be to take down the
Water
Indian Mound
towers.
water towers.
Yeah.
And then a major problem happened at the community center, and we voted to reappropriate the funds from the water tower park down here. And so, I think that was a common sense thing. The community center gets a lot more use, and there's not an emergency on the water towers. So, I think as we're planning the budget, I want to defer to the people who are the experts in these kind of things. And at the same time, we need to have a lot of flexibility to be able to handle emergencies rather than
having to take from other places.
Yeah.
I mean, like the community center thing. I had no problem with that. That happens. That's a weird thing. But having something built in for most of the things of like a couple tens of $1,000s to deal with small things that happen, sewer pipe burst, tree fall on shelter.
Yeah.
That's always good sense to have. So, also, I'm sorry, my throat is a little scratchy. I've been dealing with sickness for the past forever, it feels like, mostly allergies, if I have to guess. But, oh, I had a point as I started talking. Someone else talk.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
not me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things that come to mind for me looking through this, that I just like sort of take questions I would ask, because I do, I definitely agree on the notion that everything is trade-offs, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Everything is trade-offs. But I do think that, for example, if the tax department ends up coming in, $500,000 or $800,000 or whatever over their projection, you know what I mean? That is a thing that you could look at and say, hey, there is a little more powder that we have, that we weren't necessarily anticipating. Maybe this could accommodate, or this could be where, that type of thing comes from. And so I think the work is on us to put forth sort of the wish lists, and then it's on other folks to figure out kind of the trade-offs and that sort of thing with our direction. So a few things that I would just call out, in this, I'm not sure if this would be a city council contractual service or a law department contractual service, but I think having some allocation for outside counsel on like building zoning code reform, I think that could be a valuable thing given the age. If I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of the building and zoning code is dated either 1983 or 2003. And so having a fresh look at that would be something that I would be interested in earmarking. Just making sure that that's represented somewhere in here.
Yeah, I don't know where that would slot in exactly, but I agree. Having someone come in and just figure out a better way to have our zoning code reflect our current realities rather than the realities of 20 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that goes along with kind of changing our PUD process, although that would be a separate thing that we'd have to work on.
Yeah. So I think to some degree, Mr. Skelly, Law Director Moore, can lead, but I do think there's probably a need for some outside guidance beyond what those two gentlemen can bring. Another item that I would just sort of add as like a more of a question than an imperative would just be around sort of the staffing of the building department. I would just kind of wonder about the extent to which Mr. Wolf feels they are appropriately staffed to sort of enforce the different building codes and upkeep and maintenance and things like that. Not to mention, just with different, I'll just sort of pause there. It's a question. It's not,
Yeah, I know that Mr. Wolf has said in the past that, especially with all the new development, it's hard for them to enforce all the zoning codes, especially when it comes to vacant buildings, to all of the disused commercial property that's around here. So I think that would be a great question to ask the administration or the building department, like, could we hire a contractor part-time? Or do they need another full-time staff person there? Can we even afford that? I don't.
Yeah, but just I think sort of asking.
Just asking the question would be good.
Because I know, don't quote me on this exact number, but I do think that it is sort of around maybe 9% or so of like Norwood buildings are vacant. Something to that extent. I don't know what it is. But when I was looking at census data, there's a certain number of like units that are owner occupied, there's a certain number that are renter occupied, and then there's sort of a certain percentage. And so I would wonder about the just what that means, in the sense of are those properties being kept up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I know there's some properties like that's something I hear a lot from residents of like, hey, this property, no one's been in there for like 20 years, 30 years. Like what can we do about that? And I have to say like, well, I will talk to the building department, but they've said they don't have the capacity to enforce that. So I want, that's a big quality of life thing. Like having an empty house next to you with overgrowth, animals nesting in there, potentially people breaking in. That's a huge, like, if there's crime issues, fire issues for one, like if they don't have the electricity shut off.
Sure.
So having someone to be kind of on that, even if it's just for a little bit, to kind of get caught up on those things and make sure that the code is being enforced fairly and equally everywhere, I think would be a great thing to invest in.
Yeah, so that's another one. The other one that was mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure which sort of line item this would fall into with regard to the community center, but again, would just be, I think, like continued investment in kind of the growth and engagement they've seen with the senior center. Mm-hmm. I know right now the center director raises like $200 every week in order to put on 50 lunches for seniors throughout the course of the year. And, my thought hearing that is like, gosh, so for, $10,000, you could host a senior lunch every week of the year, and that could just be funded. And like, with all that time that you sort of spend fundraising, like what more could you be doing?
You can do different programming.
Our senior population. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so, the grand scheme of things is that, again, $10,000, is that kind of a force multiplier in terms of what it offers, the community that builds, and then also sort of the freeing up of the staff to actually do other and different programming. Like that would be an ask.
That feels like a very reasonable amount of money for
so many people to get such a good benefit out of it. Yeah. I mean,
right. And that's not to say that is like the entirety of what that ask might be or no. Whatnot. And my understanding is that ultimately, because that department is nested
within rec,
it's nested. Yeah, it's nested within sort of the overall rec umbrella. The extent to which we can sort of force it in that use case would be somewhat limited. It would still sort of be at the discretion of Mr. Gabbard and how he runs the department. But aspirationally, I think that would be a good thing to pursue.
Yeah, for what it's worth and for the good of the order. When we or the mayor or SSD allocates money to a line item, the SSD basically, or the department head, gets to spend that money however they want to within, if it's contractual services or if it's in capital or personnel. So I think there's something that we would need to figure out as council to communicate that to Mr. Gabbard, that we intend this money to go to that. And I mean, like if Mr. Gabbard, and I can't imagine that he would not spend that money if we allocate that, but in a hypothetical situation, we have to figure out how to communicate our desires, and then worst case, flex the muscle next year if that money wasn't spent in the way that we imagined it to be spent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I think going back in, checking with department heads and making sure that things that maybe they asked for or we thought would be a good idea and the administration seemed to agree, maybe next year, if that didn't happen, asking why.
Right.
Because we don't get to see the everyday spending. And certainly I do not want to micromanage. But, a once a year check-in, I think, is very fair, considering we have to be in charge of this budget and hopefully see it spent in a way that makes sense to us and is good for the city. I just thought of the other thing that I thought of after you said senior center stuff. So one thing that I'm looking forward to that I hope will be a good thing that will help is this road levy that was introduced by the mayor. And I know, Mr. McCabe, that's something that you had advocated for quite a while. So that doesn't supplant money that's already in the road budget, but depending on how much we end up raising, that could ease the burden on the road budget so that that money within that infrastructure kind of key or area is more free to be used for stuff like issues with the sewage thing that causes a road to collapse.
Right.
So it's kind of a release valve where it's not that we're saying, oh, now that we have this money from the levy, we're going to take all this road money and put it somewhere else. Right. It'll be really good to have that as extra money that we can not have to feel so stressed if something really catastrophic happens. You know, I mean, we saw it with Forest Avenue going under the lateral.
Right.
That was a huge issue, and trying to figure out how to pay for that. So if something like that happens again, we have a little more leeway. We don't have to go trying to find money from somewhere else.
And just, you know, I think just to comment on that, like my understanding is that in such a world where council is able to get that measure on the ballot,
Yes.
residents were to pass it in 2026, I think in 2028 is the first year that would actually
Correct.
be applied. So it's, you know, it's just kind of a long way off in that way. And yeah, so in some ways, like, you know, respectfully, it's like
So far away, not
it
even,
doesn't even
can't even think about it.
yeah, in my estimation, it's just kind of not even worth talking about in that
Yeah.
regard, because it's, you know, it's not even going to hit in sort of the next council cycle. It would be
The council cycle
the
after
council
that.
cycle after that.
Yeah.
So it's
I'm just excited that we're making progress at all. I've been
Well, and I think for
wanting this
context,
for 3 years.
we spent about $3.5 million out of this year's budget
Yeah.
on streets, because that was Smith, Carthage,
Yeah.
and Montgomery Road. And the next year, I forget what we're looking at for the next plan, but we're not spending $3.5 million every year.
No.
That's trickling down. Chief, you had your hand up a second ago. I wanted to see if you wanted to add something.
So in terms of the spending by department heads, you mentioned that they kind of re-rate that. I wanted to bring that back a little bit and say that's not necessarily true. There is mechanisms in place for when department heads do submit, go to the first source system, that there is an approval process before we do spend. So while we do have some degree of flexibility as money is programmed in the budget, there is an expectation that it does remain within the program.
That's good to hear. There's somebody in the city that told me a little differently, but I mean, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, that there is some restrictions around, you know, that money is not just, like you said, free will to be spent.
Yep. But yeah, and like I said, I ultimately respect the department heads. They know what they're doing more than me. I am happy to give recommendations. I feel really strongly about some, not so strong about others. So I hope that, you know, they take that into account when they present a budget to us here
Yeah.
soon.
For the sake of time, I want to save some time to talk about Norwood Community Television a little bit more deeply.
Yes.
There is a serious problem there.
Mhm.
They will not have enough money to sustain their operations through 2026. I know we said this before, but just to remind everybody again, their source of funding comes from cable subscriptions. And as people cut the cord, we're losing money. And the most recent number I was given by Tyler is they are short $140,000 of operating expenses to operate in the same manner they have next year. That is, I mean, that's a very significant amount of money that, you know, like, again, I don't know where that money comes from out of the budget. You know, with our projections, as Mr. Moore said, you know, we are seeing a little bit more income coming in, at least for this next year. But we have to have a serious conversation, and it keeps coming back to the Finance Committee to start this conversation is how do we envision Norwood Community Television next year? You know, worst case, if we don't do anything, I don't think they will be able to operate. You know, I think at best, if we don't do anything, they're going to have to cut back staff, which means cutting back access to things. You know, we own the equipment. I think the school owns the equipment. We own the cameras in the room and the other equipment, but most of their work is spent on a very, very small amount of personnel to operate. And so I just want to open up the floor to discuss, how do you guys envision finding $140,000? Are we not going to find that money, and are we going to see Norwood Community Television go away? Are there alternative options to making sure that we publish our committee meetings and big meetings?
Yeah, I think ultimately for that, it'd be great. I'd be happy to sit down with Noah and just ask, like, if we wanted to fund this, what are even the possibilities of what would be appropriate for the money to come from? Because the council budget was the first thing I thought of, but I know that's not enough. And I know we need some money to publish the ordinances. And of course, pay our lovely clerk of council. There's contractual stuff that is mandatory. But yeah, I've been going through the budget trying to figure out where it might fit in what we currently have. And maybe the administration has an idea already that they've been thinking about, but it's definitely a conversation I'd like to have with them. So I think for me, having these meetings available online at the same time or asynchronously is good for the entire community.
I agree. It would be a very big loss for
Yeah.
public transparency if these meetings were not publicized, or not
Yeah.
publicized, but publicly available. And I mean, like you said, maybe, live streaming is a little out of the option, but I don't know what the cost difference is in live streaming versus publishing them the next day.
It'd be good. I wouldn't think there'd be too much of one, but I totally admit that I am not well versed in the ways of AV. I was not one of those people in high school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would say that I think absolutely Norwood Community Television should continue to do the good work that it does. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think Mr. Grant, you said 140 is sort of the ask on the table from the city.
From Norwood Community Television.
Yeah. From the sort of city budget.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
140,000 or so. My understanding is that the school district has agreed to 20,000 in supporting Norwood Community Television. That, I would say that does kind of make me wonder, if I think about the sort of operation, I'm guessing the primary expenses, the staff time, and I would wonder about kind of the proportionality of like what all is covered, in the sense of, is it 50% of the time is council meetings, 20% is school board meetings, and then 30% is community events. You know what I mean? How, because I certainly from a meetings perspective, I think that is important, because some people can't come to these meetings for whatever reason. And so having people to have access to be able to watch is important. But, and then I think you have to kind of understand like what the levers are, of the sense of, if we can't find, 140,000, do we find 90,000? And what does that mean for coverage of, I don't know, sports games or things like that? What are kind of the, what sort of like almost like if it were like a cable package, right? Like, to keep, the council meetings and the school board meetings would cost this much to keep the council meetings, the school board meetings, and, these signature community events would cost this much. And for council, school board, signature, and sporting events would be this much, some of those different kind of tiers, if you will. Yeah, overall, I think it's absolutely a vital service, and absolutely want to find a way to support them.
Sorry, I'm taking a note from what you said. Yeah, I think it's a very valid question that we need to have Tyler here and maybe have him give him some questions to have him plan some background information to bring to us. I know that some of the sports events at the school are done remotely. There's not always a person manning the camera. I know that some of the, like our football games, there is a person manning the camera there. But I still think there has to be somebody operating the equipment, even if they're doing it from a remote
it's like a
location.
Ruby broadcast.
Yeah.
Basically, remote broadcast.
Yeah, I think I think the simplest solution is for us to request $140,000 to be added to council's contractual services budget. That is a big ask. I think it's the simplest procedural maneuver, but it is a huge request. And then I think we need to be prepared that it's not going to be fully funded.
Right.
And so I think the question becomes to the NCT, Norwood Community Television, what happens if you only get 100,000 of that or 75,000 of that, in worst case, even lower.
Yeah, no, like saying like what are the different price points essentially, and what services could reasonably be offered at those different price points, depending on how much money we are able to find. Yeah. Not fun, but
I know for what it's worth, there are services that would be able to publish our council meetings using the equipment that we have. But I think we would lose a great deal of service to our community.
yeah, they wouldn't be able to go to community events and videotape or do some of the other smaller meetings, like meet the candidates nights with Norwood together last week. So, yeah.
And is there is there basically to some degree, a like pay for service model to say, hey, this isn't, we're not going to cover these events out of our existing budget, but for the cost of $500 per 2-hour increment, we can come cover these other events, and they would just have to be sort of accounted for in the budget of those other events. Just like if I wanted to hire a wedding photographer, for example, I would, pay them for some period of time. So,
Yeah.
Do we have anything else on NCTV?
For discussion.
Yeah, for the moment, or may I?
I think that's probably it. Ms. Franzen, anything else to add?
No, just, trying to think about other avenues of funding too. I'm sure they've looked into grants and other sources of funding, but it's always good I'll keep my eyes open for stuff like that.
Yeah. And then it's more just kind of a question for our special guest here in the audience, Chief McCabe. Something that I've just been interested about, I don't think I've had the chance to ask you, is for 26, I noticed that for both police, there's a significant line item, $475,000 for two-way radio update and replacement. And then I know for fire, there's separately a $350,000 two-way radio update replacement. And I guess my question would just be, are those are those sort of distinct technologies, or is there let's just say like a bulk order sort of discount that could be pursued with those devices?
Yes, and yes. To answer your first question, the technology in public safety communications is highly technical. And so what we have is the first generation of the Motorola product, called Apex 6000 radio, and these are what is called non-supported units. So anytime a unit goes unsupported, that means that the only repairs that can be done is what Motorola has in stock, basically. They're not making parts for those, they're not doing it. By and large, when you look at the new radios, there's two different versions. But from a part support, from a firmware update, from a hardware piece, that is why we're in this force. They're basically 10 years old. While they do function, it becomes an issue of getting them repaired. And ultimately for us, on the fire department side, if when we review technology change, for us, it's all about muscle memory. If we're utilizing a new technology, I can't have radio A over here in this guy And luckily, we work with the administration in terms of having them on point, like, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. And we're in a good position to get that done. As to your question about group discounts, we do a really good job of leveraging what we can in terms of getting good pricing. Most things like this are state bid, so pricing is set.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of times there are some discounts that are run through with, right now, the state farm marshal's office does what's called its March grant. March is the acronym for state supported community. So the state farm marshal does a grant program where he helps really rural or significantly underfunded departments get base couple radios. Generally speaking, Hamilton County sees about $0 for that money. Elmwood Place is unfortunate to get a little bit, go a little on that a little bit sometimes. But we certainly do not qualify for it. So we also do that. That pricing structure is largely given across the board and just sometimes a pretty significant discount. And we've been a customer of Motorola for a number of years. So I know that the police department and fire department had conversations about doing pricing, purchasing together. And ultimately, for us, it always becomes a matter of whenever the FRP is approved and then the monies are then allocated, because a lot of times we're in a position to do something, but the plan hasn't been funded or hasn't been approved, so we're stuck waiting.
Yeah.
So is it, thank you for that answer. And yeah, I fully appreciate the nature of what you've described here and before of, sort of all your equipment has to be the same at the same time. You can't stagger it because of the training, and, those seconds matter when you're doing dangerous work, and you need to just know, trust your training, know your gear. So is it, with regard to kind of the timing, is it a helpful matter to you? Because I feel like I've heard some of this other stuff, to have the budget settled earlier in the year. So this work, I think that we're trying to for example, this FRP that I have is dated April 28th, I think, from last year. It's helpful to you to get it, get the budget
Can
settled
we have the room
earlier.
a little bit quieter for just a few more minutes?
Sorry.
So from a timing perspective, I think you're, the being in fiscal emergency kind of hamstrings you a little bit in terms of you really can't have the plan set until you really close the books for the year prior. That's a pretty lengthy process, especially at the end of the year. So I think that kind of disallows you from really being able to run right away on January 1. Now there are some mechanisms that get put in place. So if your plan is well thought out for the next 5 years and you're making appropriations at the end of December for 2026 or the next year, if those things are already accounted for and the plan is funded, you can hit the ground running January 1. So that's, and I think the administration's done a better job in terms of having that communication about, hey, what can we do to support that? Because I know it's frustrating for them as well.
Yeah.
When you have all these different changes occurring to the plan, and especially road work. Road work's a huge example of trying to book work when that plan gets done in March or April. A lot of it's already booked. I mean, the contractor's already lined up, and we're kind of just trying to get into that angle. The fire department's done, what we've tried to do is give a very long-term look at what our needs are. So there's no surprises.
Yeah.
So you have a good idea of what we need in 2035 when our request goes out. That allows us, one, some flexibility to move things as we get closer to that time frame, but specifically with the FRP, it allows us to put those 5-year projects out in front so we know what's coming down the pipeline. And we understand, obviously there are times where we're going to have to jockey some things because maybe the fiscal position of the city is not as a good a spot as we hope. You never know with the downturn of the economy. And what we always worry about is enormous price hikes, right?
Yeah.
We spend enormous amount of time redoing our budget before it even goes in. We do about a 3 or 4 time review to get the latest pricing to make sure we're right on top of it before it goes next door. So.
Got it. Well, yeah, thank you for the impromptu appearance here, and value the work that you all do and the way that you show up and help educate us. So thank you.
I really appreciate your input. And I was really happy to see when we first met a couple of years ago, all the stuff that was planned and it's just now happening as was planned.
And a lot of kudos to the city admin. I mean, they worked really hard trying to get us to have what our vision is in terms of having a plan put in place. So, anytime you've got the ability to coordinate and plan for expenditures, you're in a much better position.
Yep. I think
So
for me, my last
just
thing-
because of, go ahead.
oh gosh, go ahead, please.
Okay,
I know we're
just because of time to make sure that we can get ready for the regular council meeting, I'm going to go ahead and call this adjournment unless there's an emergency thing we need to wrap up.
The matter of claims, is there any update with regard to
I've
the
made a
resident?
request to make sure that claims come to us for our next meeting.
Okay.
They were not able to come to this meeting, so we need to unfortunately push it back 2 more weeks.
Got it. So our next meeting is on the 28th
Yes, sir.
of October?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I call this meeting to adjournment.